Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Paula De Laurentiis. I am the CEO of equities.com, and I will be moderating this afternoon's panel, which is on real estate investment strategies in a new administration. So we're going to have a conversation going into an environment that has an anti-ESG sentiment, high interest rates that were intended to go down, but may not due to some of the new economic policies. And lastly, our president acknowledging that we have an affordable housing crisis and also willing to give tracts of federal land away. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Sam Adams. He is the co-founder of Vert Asset Management. Sam, would you please share a little bit about yourself? And then I'll move on to David.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for inviting me on to your program. It's really nice to speak with you today. I am, as Paul said, co-founder and chief investment officer of Vert Asset Management. We're a dedicated sustainable investment firm. I'm also the portfolio manager on our flagship fund, the Vert Global Sustainable Real Estate ETF. The strategy just passed its 7-year anniversary, and it invests in real estate investment trusts, or REITs, on a sustainability basis. Basically, we invest in the leaders in that field. And I'm also the co-author of Your Essential Guide to Sustainable Investing. If I can get it to show up in here. There you go. It's a book I wrote with Larry Swedroe to help financial advisors and investors understand the space of ESG, SRI, and impact investing better.
Awesome. David is the co-chief impact strategist at Community Capital Management. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Paula. Hi, Sam. Hi, everybody. I work for Community Capital Management. We're an independent impact investment management firm. We're 25 years old, so we've been doing this for a while. We invest in impact fixed income in the United States, affordable housing, affordable rental housing, sustainability, full product set that allows investors to work with us, align their mission and their values with parts of their fixed income holdings that we can manage on their behalf. A lot of our products are involved in helping to address issues like income inequality, sustainability, particularly affordable home ownership, and also affordable rental housing.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for joining again. What I'd like to, before we get started, I'd love to really set the stage and talk about the real estate sector and defining it for this conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Sam. Can you give us a definition of what we are talking about in terms of real estate investment strategies as we move forward?
Yeah, so real estate's one of the biggest asset classes in the world, right? It covers a lot of different ground. And maybe the simplest way to split it up is between residential and commercial. Of course, with residential, there's single family homes. There's also apartment buildings or multifamily residential. You have manufactured and, mobile homes housing that's important actually in the United States as a source of affordable housing. And you also have senior housing facilities. You have dormitories for students. You even have prisons, right? So there's all kinds of different residential real estate. And then you also have the other side is the commercial side. And that's what we tend to invest in with the Vert Global Sustainable Real Estate ETF. That's all the REITs and the non-REIT holders of things like offices, of retail, which is, malls and shopping centers, hotels, resorts. You have the industrial sector, so that's all your factories and your warehouses. You have health care, you have storage, so that's both self-storage and then cold storage. And then you have the kind of the tech sector within real estate. Okay, so most of our data moves through or is stored in data centers. That's a big part of the real estate sector, a big part of the AI challenge these days. And actually our wireless infrastructure, like when we use our cell phones, right, or the internet like we're using now, it goes through towers or through different mechanisms that is often owned by real estate companies. So Whatever business that you're in, right, you're using real estate at some level. And so I like to think of real estate as a supplier, as one of the main parts of the supply chain to all businesses, but it is also, of course, an important source of our housing.
Thank you.
And so Sam set it up great. If you think about all of those different types of real estate, that whole spectrum that he just described, there's some common characteristics. They all need a physical place. They all need some sort of zoning permission, and we probably are going to get to that in a little bit. And then there's construction cost that has to be financed, and then a lease up or a takeout period that follows. That's true whether it's a Class A office building or a shopping mall or any of the other things that you mentioned. Where our firm, Community Capital Management, comes in is we are the investors in the mortgages that are the takeout for not all of those categories that were just mentioned, but for the ones that relate to affordable home ownership or affordable rental housing, some of the green buildings and sustainable physical infrastructure work. All of those end up with a debt instrument that can be compared to a bond. It is a bond or a mortgage-backed security or an asset-backed security, but the ownership of that from an asset allocation point of view is in fixed income. And in our particular case, it's in high credit quality, taxable fixed income. So when you say real estate and you say investing, some people may think about a real estate fund that is, we would put in the alternatives bucket for asset allocation, and those funds could be doing anything from construction, rehab, repurposing, building, specializing in any of the categories that Sam just mentioned. But those properties, that real estate, when it gets permanent financing up to and including a 30-year mortgage, that gets done in the bond market, in the mortgage market subset of the bond market, and that's where we operate.
And I'll just add one thing to David's comments there. It's easy to actually characterize this. I'll be the equity guy and he'll be the fixed income guy. I'll be the commercial guy, he'll be the residential guy for the purposes of this discussion. But also it's important to understand that, human beings are one of the few species that really builds their own terrarium, if you will, right? Like we actually construct our society and we decide what it looks like and how we interact with it by building our buildings. And so it has a huge impact, not just on the environment, right? Buildings use 40% of the world's energy and create 33% of the world's greenhouse gases. But the way we interact with each other, the way that we commune with each other is really defined by the spaces that we build. So this is a very important part of our future, is how we decide what to do with our real estate.
So we're going to talk about, forward-looking policies and changes, but can you guys, Sam, can I start with you? What is the current state of the market in real estate?
Well, and the current state of the commercial real estate market is very healthy, and that's because the economy is strong. And so when the economy is doing well, right, vacancies are low and rents are high, much to the chagrin of people like me who rent, right? So this is a good thing for real estate. Real estate does well when the economy is doing well. Of course, the flip side of that is the challenge of high interest rates. When you're trying to build more real estate, when you're trying to finance more real estate, that's where high interest rates give you some headwinds there.
Yeah, and I would just add, in terms of affordable housing or the cost of housing, which was a huge issue in the campaign for both candidates, that's something where there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. Used to be there were a handful of high-cost housing markets around the country. Now they're everywhere you look, not just East Coast, West Coast, and Florida, but all over the country. As Sam mentioned, they're very interest rate dependent. So there may be some stimulus programs, there may be some efforts to make that housing more affordable. But the crosswinds of other things, which I'm assuming we're going to talk about very soon, may swamp the benefit of potentially the Fed lowering rates, even as the bond market is worried about inflation and the impact of tariffs and the potential trade war.
So what current and existing regulations are impacting real estate today?
Well, I mean, David,
ahead.
I'll let you go. I'll let you start as a change.
Well, so it's very interesting. So zoning is local, right? So one of the things that seems to be the economists agree on and politicians can't agree on is what's the appropriate level of density in urban and suburban areas. And one way to put more people on the same amount of the earth is to build up. And that's something that is very contentious. Everybody's familiar with NIMBY. Unclear what change in the White House is going to do, to affect that. That's really region by region. There are some inclusive zoning movements around the country. They call it YIMBY, yes in my backyard. And there are communities that seem to have a consensus that they would like at least a little bit more density, but I would not say that's by any means the norm. At the federal level of where we may see changes, there are lots of regulations that affect housing, construction, OSHA, safety, Americans with disability, green building standards, financial regulation and consumer protection that affects the mortgage, the home mortgage market. All of those are currently in play for revision with consequences that I don't think any of us can really predict, but it would appear that they're going to lower certain aspects of the cost of new home construction.
Yeah, and at the federal level, there's a lot of tax that's controlled at the real estate space, in particular, things like 1035 exchanges or capital gains relief when you sell a property. As long as you buy another one in a certain amount of time, you don't have to pay tax on that. Of course, the same thing with your own home. And then, in particular, with regards to what we invest in real estate investment trusts, there's a tax-free situation there for the REIT at the corporate level. So REIT effectively are pass-through entities. They do not pay corporate income tax. They pay out dividends to investors, and the investors are taxed at that level. So unlike a C Corp, they're taxed once instead of twice.
So we mentioned, David, you mentioned earlier, green building standards. Do you expect that to change going into the new administration? Is they going to lessen those requirements? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Again, none of us have the crystal balls that we like to think that we do, but I would imagine, given some of the rhetoric during the campaign, that there will be an effort to reduce those. HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Agency, Trump has not announced yet his pick for secretary there, but certainly there are plans that have been talked about reducing HUD's role in setting green building standards. Some of those now in some states, they're state regs. So whatever the federal government does, it's not going to affect what happens in California, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois. But the federal standards, as applied, I would say are probably in play. On the other hand, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the Inflation Reduction Act, which were implemented and approved, and money has been appropriated, the effect that they're going to have, the ripple effect, the echo effect of them around greenhouse gas reduction in housing and affordable housing probably is going to be unstoppable, just the way the calendar works.
Yeah, I think that, as when you put a real estate guy in the White House, you think that's going to be generally good for real estate, right? I mean, he's going to make sure he takes care of his own businesses and his friends' businesses. So I think you're going to see some deregulation that would be generally positive for business and thereby extension real estate. You'll see some probably tax policy that's seen as positive. He's talked about removing the SALT, the state and local tax cap, on your mortgage deductions. and he's talked about scaling back the IRA. We'll wonder if he'll actually be able to do that. Most of the largesse of the IRA has gone to red states, and so he's already getting pushback from some senators and some representatives who want to keep those incentives in place. But on the flip side, tariffs are generally quite negative for everyone, including the real estate business. It just raises costs for everyone. So that could be inflationary. That could keep interest rates higher for longer.
And I would add, that there is an irony. The SALT cap was implemented in Trump's first administration, and he's campaigned for his second administration on getting rid of it. And that is, again, for states with high state income tax and property tax, very expensive and does affect housing affordability. Sam mentioned tariffs. We're going to have to wait and see what happens, but some industries are more sensitive to imported raw and finished materials, and some are less. The construction industry is very sensitive to that. And then also, we have to take President-elect Trump at his word that he's going to increase the scale of deportations. And there you have a construction industry which is much more reliant on immigrant labor, let's put it that way, than some other industries. And so potentially, two big things coming on the horizon: tariffs and deportations, that would make construction, all forms of construction, but including housing and affordable housing, more expensive.
And what about the sustainability component? Is that going to become more expensive, Sam?
Well, in most of the other than HUD and some of these federal programs, most of the green building incentives are state and local versus federal, right? So you have city level sustainability programs like Local Law 97 in New York City that says, buildings have to decarbonize at a certain schedule or be fined. You have similar type of regulations in Chicago and San Francisco and Seattle. And then at the state level, you see that as well. So you're not going to probably see those change that much. There are some, federal programs for individual homeowners to get their energy efficiency upgrades, a couple $1,000s in tax rebates and those types of things. We don't know what will happen with those. But again, tax policy only has a certain amount of ability to drive things. We do annual engagement campaigns with all of our REITs. We speak to them every year, and we asked them last year a lot about the incentives of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And they said, listen, those are tax incentives for the most part, and so they don't affect REITs, right? Because REITs aren't taxed. And so they affect their suppliers and other tangential actors in real estate, but not particularly REITs. So I think on the sustainability side, it's going to be muted for the REIT space in terms of what the incentives are. To be honest, a lot of sustainability projects pencil out already, right? And so you don't really need too much incentives. They're always helpful, of course, to do a sustainability project. Innovations are driving more efficient things like HVAC systems and smart sensors. And there's just a lot of things you can do to an existing building to make it more energy efficient, to make it, more resilient. And so a lot of those things are positive NPV projects already. Incentives are just, the cherry on the cake, if you will.
Yeah, totally agree on rehab and green retrofitting. And then, if you look at the commercial construction market, where we have visibility of that, we don't invest in it directly. Real estate firms, landlords compete to have the highest grade of LEED certification for their buildings. That's not driven by regulation. That's driven by meeting tenant demand. They're trying to lure tenants, and being in a green building is attractive to the people who make decisions about where to site their offices. Don't see that changing at all. The demand, the support, the belief in climate change, the desire, the drive on the part of individuals and corporations to be part of the solution and not part of the problem is baked into our society, at least for a significant percentage of the population.
I think it was in Jeff Gitterman's panel. They were talking about the demand drivers, in particular in AI and in data centers for renewable energies. You know, all of the big tech companies, Microsoft, Google, all those guys have net zero goals, right? They want to decarbonize by 2035 or 2040 or 2050. And something like 2/3 of Fortune Global 500 companies have net zero goals. And so those companies are not going to use data centers that aren't using renewable energies. They're not going to lease office spaces that aren't getting to them to their decarbonization goals. So that desire, that demand for LEED certified buildings, green buildings, clean, healthy buildings to put people in rather than if they wanted to not work from home all the time is a huge demand driver that will continue to exist and persist beyond any administrative policies.
So when we're thinking about your investors in the REITs, have their sentiments changed? Are they like, where's their mindset in today's market with a new president?
Well, I think the mindset of the sustainable investor in general has changed, right? So in the first go around when Trump was elected in 2016, a lot of people kind of jumped on the ESG bandwagon and said, I want to vote with my investor dollar because my Democratic vote didn't really work out in the way I wanted it to. But I think the ESG investor is a bit more sophisticated now, and they're aware of greenwashing. And they're aware of increased risks due to climate change as well. So they're looking for investment options that can help them achieve their sustainability goals, but also their financial goals. And the good news is they have more options than ever before. The question is, that they've been raising for us most recently have been around climate change and the resiliency that real estate has to climate change, right? So if you have a storm, right, we can evacuate us, right? We can even move our businesses in some cases, but you can't move the building, right? So you have to make the buildings resilient to climate change, to storm, to wildfires, to flooding and those types of things. And so that's a big part of what's happening in investors' concerns now, is saying, not only can I make my building more resilient, but especially if they're in a state like California or Colorado or Florida, they've seen the exit of insurance companies from those markets for their own homes, right? And so they're starting to see that this climate change is having real financial impact, and they're starting to wonder about their own personal finances around that, but also their investment portfolios and how it's going to affect that.
How about you, David? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Well, so client interest, Sam's absolutely right. I mean, people are interested in using their money as part of their expression. The clients that we have family office clients, insurance companies, faith-based investors, high net worth, some of the people I've seen on the call attendees, financial advisors. The common theme for all of them is that they're trying to find a way to match some of what they believe in or some of their support for a particular geography within the United States with what they can do with their discretionary investment dollars and assets. That is not a political event. That does not blow hot and cold depending on who's in the White House. As I mentioned, we're 25 years old. I don't really have a count right now how many Democratic presidents and how many Republican presidents we've worked with. Probably pretty balanced, I think, if you add it up by years. The difference you referenced at the top of this panel, Paula, the anti-ESG campaign of a year and 2 years ago feels like it's kind of run its course a little bit. I mean, there was so much pushback by investors who said this is a democratic society. Where is freedom of choice more visible and more personal than how you invest your money? And so I don't think anybody's saying that people should be obligated to make green investments or racial equity investments or anything else like that. But by the same token, how can you credibly say that someone who wants to do that, who feels that that's part of their mission or their mandate or their theory of change, whatever it happens to be, how can you say, well, no, that's not something that you should be allowed to do? And certainly, how can you do that from a legislative or regulatory point of view? So I think the clients are going to look at, like Sam said, they're going to look at what do they have, if they have change that they'd like to see in the society, in the country, on the planet. They're going to use whatever tools they have. They're going to use tools as a consumer. They may be rethinking how they use their tools in the electoral process, and they may be rethinking how they lobby for regulatory reforms, but they're certainly not going to be rethinking how they make their investments.
Affordable housing was a big issue on the campaign trail, right? So it was discussed or on the news almost every day. And I'm curious, from an investor perspective, again, we talked about ESG, sustainability, green buildings. One of those ESG components are about values-based is affordable housing. And I'm curious, what is an investor sentiment today around affordable housing? And has that increased since it's become such a big discussion during the campaign?
Well, like everything else, there's a spectrum. So, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Ginnie Mae all issue mortgage-backed securities in support of affordable housing of one sort or another, either affordable home ownership or affordable rental housing. The possibility, you never say never these days, but the possibility of a change in their status or impact seems very low. There are periodically calls for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to be privatized. That's probably something that's going to come up. It's come up before. Maybe this is the year that, or this is the administration where that happens. But if it's going to get through Congress, there's probably going to be some requirements that their mandate for affordability be maintained, even if they are taken out of government ownership where they are now. So that aspect of affordable housing is going to continue. Where there's such a concern and such a mismatch between supply and availability of affordable is in what you might call the market affordable. It's first-time home buyers, it's household formation, people who may, even if it's a married couple where they're both working, they may still have student debt, and they're in markets where their jobs are, and the cost of housing has gone up way ahead of the rate of inflation and way ahead of the increases in income. And so you hear these stories all the time. That's not the traditional lament about housing affordability. There's all kind of data about what it used to cost to get into a starter home in most markets in the country 25 years ago and what it costs now. And it's very expensive. Obviously, more supply would address that, but that supply has to come online in a way that's affordable for the people that you're trying to help and to serve. And one of the problems with having a real estate oriented president is he's focused on real estate from the supply perspective, and would appear that there'll be some successes there. But when that supply comes on market, for whom is it going to be affordable? And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, because unless we see a big increase in income, in wages, or major tax incentives, much more than was proposed by either campaign, the problem is still going to be there. Is going to be structural for quite some time.
There's some positive outlooks potentially from the deregulatory standpoint there. We were over mauled a while ago. We had too many malls, and we've seen a lot of creative owners who are sustainably minded converting those malls into mixed use properties, including residential. and a goal towards the 15-minute city, right? Being near the services that you need, and also living near the workplace that you have. And now we're starting to see that push on the office side. We have too much office space, right? So can we convert some of that office space into residential? Again, very difficult to do without some help around the zoning, around the regulatory side. So there might be some opportunities there from the new administration to help out with that.
And that's an excellent point, and related point in terms of, you know, where is the government going to look to support housing? It's always worth mentioning that the biggest support for housing, there's political attention sometimes on subsidized housing, and, you know, how does that get tax credits, and, you know, is that appropriate use of taxpayer money? I think most people would argue it is, but, you know, the home mortgage deduction is effectively the largest subsidy for housing by far, in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And that goes to, Sam said he rents. I'm a homeowner. I use it, of course, but you know, that tends to go to higher income homeowners. For years, there was no cap. Now there is a cap. You know, one way that government policy could free up a lot of resources to focus more on housing affordability is to look at the home mortgage deduction. I would say the chances of that happening in the next 2 years are 0. But since we're having a public policy conversation, I thought it was worth mentioning.
Well, the other one is also writing off your state property taxes. So living outside of New York City, your real estate taxes are incredibly high. And that's no longer, you know, that could be an incentive too, right? Because no matter where you are in the, you know, in the ladder, if you're starting out and it's very difficult to purchase the home, then to maintain the home and pay those taxes, and then not having it as a write-off is you know, it's another challenge, another hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, and Sam mentioned the SALT, the state and local tax deduction. And, you know, I'll say it again. The first Trump administration put that in as a cap, and he campaigned on getting rid of it as a cap. But if you look at where that falls, there's an enormously large percentage of the population and the electorate that does not have state and local taxes above the current, I think it's $10,000 above that, you know, above that match. Now, I'll warrant to say that quite a few people who are listening to this call are above that. But again, is removing that going to help housing overall? I probably at the margins. Is it going to help housing affordability for non-traditional households, for first-time home buyers, you know, for people who've had to move because their job has moved? Not really. You know, maybe at the margins, but not in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I would give the listeners some some incentives here, that the main challenge around affordable housing is the lack of it, right? And that's because we have a supply shortfall in housing, right? We're missing, you know, several million units of housing in the United States that we need to build, and the main impediment to that is zoning, is the NIMBYs, right? We are refusing still to build up. I live in California, and it's kind of a circus here that, you know, that the California tries to put the incentive to build more locally, and then the very local places turn down those or find ways to keep that from happening in their backyard, and so us as citizens locally can do more around that than the feds can, to change that kind of attitude and say, you know what, let me be in support of that 4-story multifamily apartment building going up near my neighborhood, rather than trying to shut it down.
This was really very, very, very informative. And we've got a few more minutes. We only have one question right now, and I want to throw it out there right now because it's important for our listeners. This is for Sam. they're asking for your ticker symbol for your REIT.
That's my favorite question. Uh, VGSRX. So, sorry, VGSR is the ETF one. Vert Global Sustainable Real Estate, VGSR. The X was when it was a mutual fund last year. Now it's an ETF. Same strategy, same everything.
There is another question here, and it's about insurance. And where do you see the insurance industry integrated into the real estate investments?
Well, I think that if you are a homeowner or you are thinking about moving at all, I think you need to factor in particularly the financial advisors that are on the call. This needs to be part of the advanced financial planning that you're doing for your clients in terms of retirement or their future planning. The need to self-insure your home is just going to go up all across the country. Insurers are going to continue to walk away from insuring things like wildfire and flooding and those types of things. So just be prepared for that conversation. Housing is going to get more expensive around that dimension for certain. If you can get insurance, it will also be more expensive. That's for sure. There needs to be some deregulation around that as well. But again, that would just increase prices. So that's going to be a continual problem. We can see a preview of that. Reinsurance rates have been going up dramatically over the last years. There's a lag. It hasn't hit the actual insurance market as quickly as it has reinsurance. So just be prepared for that eventuality. And then, I'm not saying this because I'm a renter and I have a problem with homeowners, David. I'm not, this is not a fight I want to get into, but you might want to think about the possibility of being a long-term renter, right? Depending on the changes in climate change. You don't exactly know whether you want to be golfing in Arizona 10 years from now, right? Or whether you want to be golfing in Florida 20 years from now, right? So those are just things to consider in your advanced financial planning conversations with clients, understanding that the way things are right now, both in terms of where you want to be and how much it's going to cost to be there, are not going to be the way they are 10 years from now.
I can't tell whether Sam is saying that because he's, concerned about my future, or he thinks I'm so old that I shouldn't be a homeowner anymore. But either way, it's a good point.
We have another question. Let me just check. Sorry, that was just a nice comment for the panelists. Before final thoughts, is there something that I missed? Would you like to just share your final thoughts, and then we can say goodbye to our session?
Well, I'll repeat something that I said before. When investors, when people don't get the results they want from their democratic vote, they turn to their shopping vote, their dollar vote, and their investor vote. And we'll probably see this again, just like we saw in 2016. I think the difference is now we've been through that hype cycle for ESG and impact investing, and then the anti-ESG backlash. And so the conversations are more mature, they're more understanding. And we actually didn't see the money run out the door like a lot of the news articles have claimed. And so I think the new investors that are coming on and looking at, they might be taking a look at this now, will see some very interesting things. They'll see funds that aren't greenwashing. They'll see funds that aren't underperforming. They'll see things that are that better fit for their investment portfolios. And an analogy I use with retail investors is, 2016, you're looking at an EV probably was a sacrifice of some sort in comparison to the gas vehicle that you had. Now that's no longer the case. For most car buyers, an EV is a better deal than a gas car now. And the same thing's happening with sustainable investing, because we've got better sustainable investments now. And when you look underneath the hood of that, right, that is not contingent or dependent upon some administrative policy at the federal level. The reason is because sustainability just makes sense from a business perspective. And again, going back to the homeowners, if you've changed the light bulb from an incandescent to CFL, fluorescent, and then to LED, you understand this, right? There's a little bit of an upfront investment, but then you're saving money on the utility bill. And that's why we're just going to see more and more movements to sustainability in the real estate space, because it pencils out. It just makes financial sense to make these investments up front and then pay less going forward in terms of maintenance, in terms of energy costs, in terms of water costs, in terms of resiliency and recovery costs. So the sustainable investment movement is here to stay in the real estate space. And the Trump administration, it's kind of a mixed bag we're seeing in terms of some things that are going to help that and some things that are going to hurt that.
And I would just say, if you look for a theme that sort of runs through a lot of the changes that we've talked about that are potential changes, all of which remain to be seen starting next year, a lot of them have in common, there's a thematic link of lowering costs for business generally. We've been talking about real estate and housing, but it's going to be true for other aspects of the corporate sector. The stock market loves that. Right? I mean, that's heroin for the stock market, because I guess that's wrong. That's cocaine for the stock market. And so, that's a boost to the bottom line. Now, you could argue if corporate costs are going down, the consumer should reap the benefits of that, not the corporation itself. That has not proven to be the case in instances like this. Those costs are going to be effectively, in many instances, outsourced, if you will, to society overall, to the consumer, including the homeowner and the potential homeowner. And then in terms of environmental regulations, you can expect that to be outsourced effectively to all of us and onto the planet. So that may all be terrible public policy. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions on that. But it creates an environment that is very, very strong for investing, because it is just something that, the animal spirits of our industry love to see. And it certainly would appear that, their favorite show is coming on the air next January.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. This was very informative. I enjoyed our conversation, and based on our comments, I think others have enjoyed it as well. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.